You said your company, your commercial company, was like Latent Image.
Yeah.
I mean, so what did you? Was it like Mad Men? Were you all sort of in sharp suits and sipping cocktails?
Oh,
or were you
no,
actually
no. This was before we knew we were supposed to be that way. This was just, we were just guys that, basically we all really wanted to make film, and we thought that the way maybe to get there was to shoot a lot of film and therefore shoot a lot of commercials, industrial films, things like that. And that's really how it all started. And we were quite successful, and we were able to keep buying equipment. And pretty soon we had our own sound equipment, and we had everything that we needed to make a movie. And so we sort of boldly said, let's make a movie.
Because, I mean, the Calgon story, I
Yeah.
mean, that was your one commercial for the water softener brand.
Well, it was, you know what? It was the one, Alan's talking about one commercial that we shot for Calgon, which is called the Calgon Story, which is basically a lampoon of Fantastic Voyage. Was that the name of it?
Yes, that's it.
And about a little submarine that's reduced to micro size and goes inside a washing machine to find out what makes clothes dirty. And that was the whole premise. But the reason we accepted that job was because it needed to be shot, because this was a big advertising agency, needed to be shot in 35 millimeter. And we reasoned that if we did this job, we would be able to buy, and at that point you could buy them relatively inexpensively, a 35 millimeter camera. And that is the camera with which we shot Night of the Living Dead.
And take us through the process of getting to Night of the Living Dead. I mean, because did you just sit around thinking, well, what's going to make the biggest impact? It's going to be a horror movie because they were making the most money at the time, or what? What was that? Was it as simple as that?
Pretty much, yeah. At first, I pitched this idea, which was a very sort of high-minded, Bergman-esque idea that I was modeling after somehow in the back of my mind after the Virgin Spring. And it was, a sort of a coming-of-age story in the Middle Ages, so coming of middle age. Of course, it never went anywhere. And so we sat around and reasoned at our local tavern that, well, maybe we should do something more commercial, and landed on horror. And I had written a little short story on which Night of the Living Dead was based, basically. The first part of the story was really the film. And then I had the second part of the story was a paragraph, and the last part was a sentence where the dead had taken.
This is where the whole trilogy thing comes from, that people say that you wrote it as a trilogy.
It might be, and that's not exactly true, because all I did was write that short story, and it's just that the last sentence was, the last part of this, third part of the story was just a sentence. And now the dead win, or whatever it was. The dead had taken over. I'll never do that, because thinking better of it, I don't think the dead could ever successfully run a government. But some have tried.
Did you look at other horror movies around the time, to sort of do some sort of like basic research to see what area you were going to involve yourself in?
I think all of us had seen most of the biggies anyway. I had probably seen them all, but I always felt that there was more to be done. It seemed to be that the reason to do a horror story, a terror story, is to upset the apple cart. It's the reason you do it, is to upset the apple cart. And it seemed that everybody was setting it upright again when the movie was over. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. I want to just leave it upset. And that's really one of the big motivating factors that was there. And that's why the film, the tragic ending of the film, initially Columbia was interested in distributing it, but they said they needed to have a different ending. And, I think they may have been sensitive to the sort of the rioting that was going on at that time. The night that my partner Russ Striner and I were driving the very first print of Night of the Living Dead, which our title was Night of the Flesh Eaters. And the very first answer print that we ever had was in the trunk of the car, and we were driving into New York. And that night we heard on the radio that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And so all of a sudden, the film took on a completely different, no pun intended, complexion.